Hi everyone, my name's Jen. I'm an author and a book reviewer, and I have been making videos on this channel for coming up to 10 years now. It will be 10 years this year. Let me know in a comment how long you have been here for, because I'm just nosy and curious like that. I thought we could do something quite fun today, even though I haven't quite reached my 10-year anniversary. That's later on in 2024. I do have 10 years worth of best books of the year videos, so from 2014 to 2023. And 5 years ago, which really doesn't feel that long ago at all looking at this video, but it is 5 years ago, I'm gonna have to believe it, in I think January, February 2019, I filmed a video called Best Books of the Last 5 Years Are My Favourite Books, Still My Favourite Books, where I went through my best books of the year videos from the previous 5 years and discussed all of the books from those videos and then picked a definitive best of list from all of those. I'm wearing a, I don't know if I would call it fetching red jumper in that video. So if you haven't seen that video, it will be linked in the description box down below, but you don't have to go watch it in full because I will be recapping it towards the end of this video, don't worry. The plan, therefore, is for me now, I've got my laptop here, to go through my best books of the year videos from the past 5 years, talk to you about all of the books that I included in those videos, whether they have stayed with me or if they've faded, because sometimes favourite books are favourites for the time that you read them, and that's great, and sometimes they're favourites for forever or for a much longer period of time, which is also wonderful. So we'll see which ones have stuck. I remember being surprised last time I did this video as to how sometimes favourites that were lower down on my list were the ones that had stuck with me the most. Maybe they were imperfect, but they had a bigger impact. As we go through, any books that I think are ultimate favourites, I'll save for discussion at the end of this video, when I'm also going to go back to my best books of the last 5 years video that I filmed 5 years ago and see if those books are still worthy of being on my ultimate list. So at the end of all of this, we will have a list of my favourite books from the past 10 years. And don't we all love a good list? I think that we do. Okay, so let us begin with the best books of 2019. Who remembers my Baker Boy cap era? I have a soft spot for these Baker Boy caps. It's what I started wearing when not when I first started getting alopecia, because I was wearing headscarves first, and then I think I switched to Baker Boy caps, and then I slowly started to wear wigs. So let me open up this video description and see what we've got. We have 16 books on this 2016 list, and I'll go from least favourite to most favourite. The least favourite was Becoming Unbecoming by Una. I will insert covers on the screen as I go. Apologies to future me editing this video, I'm sorry. So this one definitely has faded for me, but I remember it being a graphic memoir, also mixing in historical facts about the Yorkshire Ripper. It was impactful at the time, but as I said, hasn't stuck. Then we've got Lullaby by Leila Slimani. This, again, has faded a bit for me over time, but it was a brilliant character study about a nanny who killed 2 children, and you know that from the very beginning, and then you jump back in time to see why she did it. I remember there was a lot of discussion on BookTube at the time as to whether or not it was a satisfying book. Did it give you all the answers that you wanted? I feel like it didn't, but I don't think that was the point. I think it wasn't really supposed to give you all of the explanation, because it couldn't, because she'd done such a horrendous thing. Then we've got Flesh by Mary Jean Chan, a brilliant poetry collection, which I don't think will make my ultimate favourites list, but I would definitely recommend it. Then we have Doreen by Barbara Noble, and this is what I was referring to when I said that sometimes favourites lower down the list can have a lasting impact for one reason or another, because I find myself thinking about this book all the time. I'm going to write this down in my notebook, and we can come back to it at the end and decide whether or not it should make it to my ultimate favourites list. Because underneath that, we've got Daddy's Gone A-Hunting by Penelope Mortimer. So I've clearly linked those 2 books together, probably just because they're both Persephone books. But that book hasn't lasted for me. It was still brilliant. I think it was from the 1950s. It's about a woman who is quite jealous of her daughter's freedom, or the freedom that she sees her daughter as having, because she feels very much tied down to her life in the house. But it's also about abortion as well, and the discussion that she has with her daughter about abortion, and it was very much ahead of its time. Then we've got Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, which is translated from the Japanese by Jenny Tapley Takamori. I love this book. It's about a woman called Kiko who works in a convenience store. Her family want her to progress, in inverted commas, along a career ladder, and she has absolutely no interest in doing that at all. She is very happy working at the convenience store. She says that the handbook that she's given there, telling her how to do her job, is like a handbook for understanding society, and she feels very secure in this job. She's very happy, and other people can't possibly understand it. I don't think it will make my favorites list, but I did really enjoy it. In fact, I would say it's probably higher on this list now for me than it is or was in 2019. Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters is, I think, the first Sarah Waters book that I read. She writes historical fiction, queer historical fiction. This one is Victorian. It is about a girl called Nan who becomes obsessed with this performer called Kitty, and they run away together to London. It is an epic tale. It is huge. I would always recommend the audiobooks of Sarah Waters' fiction because they're narrated so well. Most of them, I think, are narrated by, I want to say Julia McMahon. Let me double check that. It's narrated by Juanita McMahon. And I always say that Sarah Waters' books are for people who wanted to love Dickens and then didn't end up loving Dickens, which is me. I mean, to be fair, I think if you love Dickens too, you probably still enjoy Sarah Waters, but the amount of research and detail that she puts into her narratives is just fantastic, but not tiresome in the way that I find Dickens to be. And obviously with the added queer elements too, very much up my street. Not a favourite because it's not my favourite Sarah Waters, but I did love it at the time. Then we've got two books by Tracy Chevalier. The first one I think is my favourite of the two, which is Remarkable Creatures. It's about the relationship between Mary Anning and Elizabeth Philpott, about them hunting for fossils and about men taking credit for the work that they were doing. Love that one. There was also A Single Thread, which is about a woman called Violet Speedwell, who was labelled as a surplus woman. This is the period after the First World War, before the Second World War. Her fiancé had died in the First World War, and she, along with many other women, found herself single, and she decided that she would leave her mother's house and set off on her own and try to make a mark on the world. It's also about making prayer mats in churches. I love that about Tracy's books, is that she'll do a huge amount of research into normally a craft area. So her new novel that's coming out this year is about glass making. She's done ones about tapestry, about painting, obviously Girl with a Pearl Earring, and this one was about creating prayer mats, and also about bell ringing. There was quite a lot about bell ringing. I'm not sure that either of these will make my ultimate favourites list. Remarkable Creatures is definitely on the cusp, but I think I'm not going to include either of them. Elizabeth's Lists by Lula Ellender was another brilliant book, obviously because it was on my favourite books of the list, which it was a non-fiction book where she was researching the history of her family through these lists that her grandmother had written. Her grandmother had travelled around a lot because her husband was a diplomat, and she could extrapolate lots of things from the shopping lists that she made. She would catalogue everything that came into the house and how much it cost. Then we've got Not Here by Human Win, which is a brilliant poetry collection, but I don't think I will include it on my ultimate favourites list. Then we have Spring by Ali Smith, which is a brilliant book in her quartet, but not my favourite from the quartet, so I don't think I'll include it. Lanny by Max Porter is also a brilliant book, but I know that I already have a book by Max Porter in my ultimate favourites list because I included Grief is the Thing with Feathers, and I think out of those two I prefer Grief. Lanny is set in a commuter town near London about a young boy who goes missing, and it's mixed in with elements of the supernatural. Brilliant on audiobook because it is a full cast narration and there are so many different voices from the town in it and they all bleed together and it just becomes almost musical. I just adored it. But then we have Blue Monday by Nikki French, which is a representation of all of the Frida Klein books, because I read all of that series at the end of 2019, and I have to include that series in my ultimate favorites list because I talk about it all the time, don't I? So I'm going to write Frida Klein series down in my notebook and we can chat about that later. Okay, best books of 2020. The Baker Boy cap is still here, still very much here. This was in the flat before we moved here, and I remember 2020, I mean, it was terrible for most things, but not for books. I remember it being an amazing year for books. So we've got some gems to talk about. There are 21 books on this list, so I'm not particularly helping myself. Let's whiz through the ones near the bottom of the list. So we've got People from My Neighborhood by Hiromi Kawakami. This is a collection of very short stories. I think they're called palm of the hand stories about people in a small neighborhood in Japan. They're interlinked a little bit. Some of them are quite dark and twisted. Very much enjoyed it, but not going to make my ultimate favorites list. How to Wash a Heart by Barney Kapil is a poetry collection, which was also brilliant, looking at race and power and body, but I don't think it will make my favourites list. The Wanderer by Peter van der Ende. I had such a soft spot for this book and still do, but I think because it reminds me of The Arrival by Sean Tan, which is I think my favourite ever silent graphic novel. It's about a paper boat that's travelling around the world, so it has a very, very similar premise to The Arrival. It's in black and white, very beautiful. Then we've got this Green and Pleasant Land by Aisha Malik, which is about a man called Bilal who promises his mother on her deathbed that he will try and build a mosque in their sleepy English town, and this doesn't go down well with the locals. It was heartwarming, but also heartbreaking too, and funny in places. It had a real mixture of emotions and I enjoyed it a lot. Then we've got The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. It is a family saga and it's about colorism and racism in the States. And I'm sure that you're familiar with it because it was a huge deal when it came out, especially after the success of her first book, The Mothers. Then we have Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, which is about a young girl called Jam who has to save her best friend Redemption from a monster that's in his house. It has this element of magical realism and it's very, very powerful, but not going to make my favourite books of the year. Tiny Moons by Nina Minya Powles is a non-fiction book that will make you very hungry. It's cataloguing the food that she ate during a year in Shanghai. And again, loved it. Won't make my favourites though. Then we've got Leave the World Behind by Ruman Alam. I told you this list was really good in 2020. Leave the World Behind was one of those strange books because when I started reading it, I remember hating it. I hated the writing style. It's super pretentious. And then I realized, oh, it's deliberately pretentious because it's about this pretentious white couple and this is how they would present themselves to the world. So it is over the top. It is using all of these long words when it's not necessary because they are so full of themselves. So they are traveling from their home in New York to a holiday home that they've rented for the weekend just outside of New York. And while they're there, something goes wrong. All the electricity goes out, the Wi-Fi is down, and it appears that an event is going on maybe in New York, but maybe worldwide too. Then the owners of this house turn up, which is an older black couple, and this white couple don't believe that this black couple own the house because they're quite racist. And it's about them interacting with each other and trying to figure out what is going on in the world outside. It has recently been made into a film, which I really enjoyed as well. It's quite different. I think tonally it had to be. It's more explicit, the film. You see more overt examples of what's going on outside as opposed to a lot of unknowns, which is what the book deals with. But I think because of the different mediums, that was necessary. Anyway, I love that book, but it's not going to make my favourites list. In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, a brilliant non-fiction book about an abusive queer relationship and how that intersects with fairy tales and the stories that we tell ourselves. A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol, a middle grade book, Own Voices, autistic narrative about a young girl called Addie who wants to put up a plaque in her village to commemorate women who were murdered in the name of witchcraft, because she believes, as do many people, that these women were probably outsiders, possibly autistic like her, or were perhaps queer people. For instance, The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill, the most wholesome, warm, cozy graphic novel ever. How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell. I'm surprised this one is on this list. This one has completely disappeared from me. Maybe it was a very specific 2020 book because it was about, I was going to say disassociating. That's not what I mean. Detaching, disconnecting from the internet and being present. I think just because of the nature of 2020, I found it very impactful at the time. Mr. M and I were going for our 5 a.m. walks later on in 2020 when we were leaving the house, going to the local forest, and I feel like maybe the discussions in that book were mirroring things that we were trying to do at that time, but it hasn't lasted for me. Then we've got Pew by Catherine Lacey, which is a creepy little book about a person who is discovered in a church in a town in America, and the townsfolk can't work out if this person is a boy or a girl, how old they are, what race they are, where they've come from, and they do not like that they are unable to catalogue and categorize this person. It's saying a lot of very interesting and important things about immigration and about white supremacy, and yeah, I thought it was fantastic. I don't think it will make my ultimate favourites. Then we've got Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo. You can see me smiling because this book just made me really, really happy. It's also being adapted. Can't remember if it's into a TV show or a film, but that should be coming out, I think, sometime this year. It's about a 70-something-year-old man called Barry who came over to the UK from Antigua with his wife Carmel, but has always been in love with his best friend Maurice, and he's deciding whether or not he should leave his wife to be with Maurice. It is one of the most wholesome books I think I have ever read. Saying it's wholesome makes it sound like it's not cutting and brilliant in other ways. I don't want to say it's just really cozy or anything like that. It is all kinds of dimensions. It's brilliant, but I know that there is another book by Bernardine Evaristo that I'd like to include in my favourites list, and I don't have to only include one book per author, but that's what I'm leaning more towards, so we'll save her space for later. Summer Water by Sarah Moss, also something that hasn't faded for me but isn't my favourite Sarah Moss book ever, so I think I won't include it on this list, but it's an interconnected short story collection about a group of families that's staying on this caravan site in Scotland, I think, during a rainy holiday, and it has this element of fear that escalates throughout because a lot of the families are suspicious of each other, and you just get this inkling that something not very nice is going to happen. It's very impactful. Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, which won the Women's Prize, is also being adapted into a film at the moment. This is about Agnes, who was Shakespeare's wife, and about two of their children who were twins, and about a plague that meant that one of those twins died. Agnes was very much into healing, so people thought of her as a witch. You know, if a man did it, it's fine, but if a woman did it, no, heresy. So it's all about her and her life and the most painful exploration of grief. Something that's quite interesting about the book is that Shakespeare is never named in it. He's an absent father for the most part, but you can fill in a lot of the blanks, which I thought was interactive, playful, I don't know, just interesting. And then we have Summer by Ali Smith, again from the quartet. Not my favourite from the quartet though. Sitting Pretty by Rebecca Taussig. I am tempted to include that. Let me write that down and we'll come back to it later. The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. This one was so much fun on audiobook. It is exploring Pride and Prejudice through the lens of Mary, so the middle sister. About a third of it is set during the time of Pride and Prejudice, and then you're following her after that book ends, and some of the other characters too. I listened to it on audiobook, narrated by Kristen Atherton. One of the best audiobooks that I have ever read, and I have such strong memories of listening to it whilst decorating our flat, whilst painting. And I love that memory. I don't think it's going to make my favourite books list, but it does have a special place in my heart. And then the final two are books that are going to make my best books list, which is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo and The Bass Rock by Evie Wilde. So I'll talk about those towards the end once we've gone through the rest of these videos. Okay, 2021, let's go. This year is the first year of the wigs, and I'm wearing a red jumper and this Red Riding Hood necklace as well. I think we have 22 books in this list. The first one was Universal Love by Alexander Weinstein, which I would recommend for fans of Black Mirror. It's a short story collection, specifically looking at dystopian themes to do with love. Then Ill Feelings by Alice Hattrick is a non-fiction memoir. Obviously it's non-fiction, it was a memoir about chronic illness. The Therapist by Niall Giacomelli. I think if I redid this particular year's list would be higher. It's a dystopian magical realism pandemic book where people start to go invisible, but really it's about grief. It's one of the Fairlight modern books, really short. Thought it was brilliant. All the Names Given by Raymond Antrobus is also on this list. I really did enjoy this one, but I do much prefer his debut, which was The Perseverance. Underbelly by Anna Whitehouse is a very gripping novel that I read over the course of one day. I think I read it the day that it came out. It's about two women who befriend each other at the school gates, but they probably wouldn't become friends if their kids weren't friends in the classroom. One of them runs a blog and then starts to exploit the other one for content. I thought it was a brilliant book about social media, really quite creepy in places. The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith is a lot of fun. The adaptation of that is coming out really soon, a new adaptation with Andrew Scott, which I'm so looking forward to. It's about a con artist called Tom Ripley who travels to Europe, and he's being paid by the father of a man to bring his son home. Not Tom Ripley's son, the father who is funding this trip. But instead he goes there and gets involved in all kinds of mischief. That's quite a light-hearted word for what he does, mischief. The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Filyar is a brilliant short story collection about a series of women. They don't know each other, but they're all linked thematically, as in they go to church, or they used to go to church, or the family goes to church, and they're looking for their sense of selves in many different ways, and many of these stories are queer as well. Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi is a book about grief and addiction and science. I remember it being very powerful, but I don't think it will make my ultimate favourites list. Boy Parts by Eliza Clark, extremely twisted, would recommend this one on audiobook. It's about a woman called, what is her name? Irina? Yes, Irina. So it's about a woman called Irina who is a photographer who likes to seduce men and then take compromising photos of them. It was Eliza Clark's response to the film Promising Young Woman, which I know she really doesn't like. So this was her version of discussing revenge and violence. And it's brilliant and completely messed up. Then we have Disability Visibility, edited by Alice Wong, which is a non-fiction book with a series of essays by disabled writers. I loved parts of this, not all of it. It was a little bit uneven, as a lot of anthologies are, because that's just, you know, that's going to be the case because it's collecting a lot of work by so many different writers. So whilst it made this favourites list, it's not going to make my overall favourites list. Strange Beasts of China by Yan Gi. This is translated from the Chinese by Jeremy Tiang and is the most surreal book about a journalist who is investigating claims of mythological creatures in her city. So it's about cryptozoology, and it's almost like a series of interconnected short stories actually, because each chapter focuses on one particular creature. I find myself thinking about it often, but it won't make my favourites list this time. Julia and the Shark by Kieran Millwood Hargrave, illustrated by Tom DeFreston, is about a young girl called Julia whose mother is a scientist and has serious bouts of depression, and it's about Julia learning about that wanting to support her mum and feeling quite lost in that. I thought it was such a brilliant book because it doesn't patronise children and deals with big topics in brilliant ways. The Red Room by Nikki French is one of my favourite standalones by them, but I've got the Frida Klein series on my favourites list, so I won't be including that. 50 Sounds by Polly Barton, brilliant non-fiction book about translation. I will link an interview that I did with Polly about this book in the description box down below if you would like to go and check it out. She talks about being a translator as the midwife of books, which I thought was a really wonderful image. Death in Her Hands by Atessa Moshfegh is a novel about a woman who lives alone in the woods, and she believes that someone has been murdered because she finds a note attached to a tree. But has anyone been murdered? Is she making it up? Is she imagining things? She's trying to solve this crime, and the whole point of the book is you working out what narrative you should believe. Passing by Nella Larson is one that I'm going to include on my favourite books list, so we'll come back to that later. Honorifics by Cynthia Miller, a brilliant poetry collection, but I don't think I'll be including it in my favourites list. Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingalls is my favourite editions that I've read so far. Think Shape of Water, but even more twisted than that. It's about a woman who falls in love with a frogman called Larry, but it's also about losing a child as well. Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, a brilliant Sarah Waters book. As I said, I love Sarah Waters books, but again, I don't think I'm going to include this one on a favourites list. If I'm remembering correctly, this one is very much inspired by Wilkie Collins' The Woman in White. Then we've got the Hopkins manuscript by R.C. Sheriff. I did love this one so much. I don't think it's going to make my favourites list. And I think the reason that it's so high up in this particular list is because I read it right at the end of 2021. So I think I was a bit biased towards it, but it is the writings of a man who has discovered that the moon is about to collide with the earth, and he thinks he's documenting something really profound and that he'll be remembered as this amazing historian, but he's just an ordinary bloke. I think if you like John Wyndham, you'd really like the Hopkins manuscript. And then the last one is Mrs. March by Virginia Fito, which I think I will include on my favourites list, so we'll come back to that one later. Okay, 2022, we don't have as many books in this particular video, and I'm also wearing another version of this shirt here. So we had The Need by Helen Phillips, which is a really unsettling book about a woman who is an archaeologist, and she starts to find all of these artifacts that have something a little bit off about them. So it'll be the Bible, and in every way the same as the Bible that she knows, but God is referred to as a woman. Or there'll be a Coca-Cola bottle, but the label will be slightly different to any Coca-Cola label that's ever existed here. I don't want to say more than that because it's so full of suspense, I think I would ruin it. But if that premise intrigues you, I would encourage you to pick it up. Things We Do Not Tell the People We Love by Huma Qureshi is a wonderful short story collection. If you love reading about complicated family dynamics, that one is for you. 100 Queer Poems Anthology. This is a book that I am part of, and as the title would suggest, is 100 queer poems by 100 queer poets. Creatures of Passage by Merowe Yejide is full of Egyptian folklore, and it's ghostly. It's about a town trying to get rid of an evil force, and I would say it's almost like the adult version of Pet by Akweke Emeze. So if you would like a book like that for grown-ups, may I present this one to you. Woman Eating by Claire Coda is a really fun book about a supposedly 20-something woman, but she is a vampire and therefore isn't aging. And it's about her starting art school, leaving home, trying to forge her way in the world and not eat people. Indelicacy by Amina Kane is about a woman who works as a cleaner at an art gallery, but she really wants to be a novelist. So she marries a man she doesn't love, thinking that will give her time to write. But then because she's away from society in his house all the time, well, their house, but she thinks of it as his house, she finds her inspiration lacking. It's set in this really indistinct time and place, so you can never really pinpoint the period, and that creates a really eerie feeling around everything. We Don't Know What We're Doing by Thomas Morris is a collection of short stories that looks at toxic masculinity. It's set in and around a small village in Wales. Some of the inhabitants have left and now live elsewhere, but find themselves drawn back time and time again. It's a really heartbreaking book. If you would like a cry, check that one out. Nightcrawling by Layla Motley was a really impressive book. I think it's faded for me a little bit over time. I think because it's one of those books, not to take anything away from it because it is brilliant, but because it emotionally affected me so much, I think it's higher up on the list because of that. But objectively looking back, I think it would still be on here, but maybe lower down. I read it when it was longlisted for the Booker Prize and was really glad to have been introduced to it, as I was the next one, which is What Willow Says by Lynn Buckle, which I read because it was on the Barbellion Prize longlist. This is why I enjoy following prizes. You don't always love everything, obviously, but it does mean you discover things that you probably wouldn't do otherwise as well. This is a novel about a grandmother and a granddaughter who live in the middle of the woods, and they've created their own personal sign language to communicate. So it's about deafness, it's about culture, it's about communication. And then the granddaughter starts school and learns a more standardized form of sign language. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, also gets a hearing aid. And the grandmother is lamenting that loss of their own personal world, the bubble that they live in, whilst acknowledging that she needs to let go, allow her granddaughter to communicate with the outside world. She's just frustrated that the outside world is so focused on the hearing aspect of things and forcing deaf people to assimilate into hearing culture. It's got all of this beautiful language in it to do with myths as well. After that, we've got Silent House by Nell Patterson, which again is an Own Voices book exploring deaf culture. It is about a young girl who was murdered and none of the inhabitants of the house heard anyone break in because they are deaf. And it's the first in a trilogy. I definitely preferred the first book in the trilogy, Silent House, which you can read as a standalone, but I liked reading all three of them. Untold Night and Day by Bae Suar, translated from the Korean by Deborah Smith, probably would be slightly lower on my list if I was revising this year's list right now, but I really loved it. It was a hypnotic novella about a woman walking through Seoul during one day and night, and again is talking about communication, and in this case also translation as well, and how stories can repeat themselves, and that's reflected in characters repeating themselves throughout the novel. Ghost Music by Anne Yu. Again, love this one. Don't think it's going to make my favourites list though. It's so close to making my favourites list though, because I do find myself thinking about it a lot. It's about a woman who discovers things about her husband that she never knew before, and she's finding it really unsettling. And this is mimicked by mushrooms that she is dreaming about and how those are taking over everything and multiplying. I also find myself thinking about her debut novel Braised Pork quite a lot as well, so if you've never checked out work by her, please do. And then we have 4 books on my top books of this year's list, which is 2022, and I think I'm going to consider all of them for my ultimate favourite books list. So we've got Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au, Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer, Still Missing by Beth Gutchin, and Eleanor Knows by Claudia Pinheiro. Let me make a note of those. Actually, scrap that. I'm going to carry 3 of them over, but not Still Missing by Beth Gutchin. That, I think, again, is so high up on the list because I read it right at the end of that year. It's a crime book that is published or reissued by Persephone. It first came out in the 80s, and it's about a woman whose young son goes missing. It's very gripping, very tense. It's also looking at homophobia in the 80s. So much to love about it. So close to making my ultimate favourites, but I actually think I'm gonna leave it. So I am gonna carry over Cold Enough for Snow, Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies, and Eleanor Knows. Right. On to 2023. Now this one is going to be the hardest one because it's only February 2024. So these are obviously very recent reads for me, relatively speaking, when we're looking at the other videos I've been talking about. And I think you can have bias towards books that you have read more recently, as I've discussed with books that made it onto my favourites list for previous years that I read right at the end of that reading period. So let's see how many I'd like to carry over. And I think also Conversely, because I'm so aware of bias for books that you've read recently, it may make me more reluctant to include any of these books on my ultimate favourites. I mean, all of this is arbitrary. It doesn't actually matter which ones make it onto the list. We're just having a bit of fun. So I should remember that as we go. Right, so I'm going to whiz through these super quick because if you follow my channel anyway, you'll have heard me talking about these really recently. So we had The Hierarchies by Ros Anderson, which is like Clara and the Sun and Never Let Me Go merged together into one book about a robot called Sylvie who would like to explore the world and learn more about it. How Kyoto Breaks Your Heart by Florentina Liao is a non-fiction book about female friendship, the breakdown of friendship, but also about food and living in Kyoto, and it was really evocative. The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham, old school sci-fi book about a town where all of the women fall pregnant after a weird event where everyone in the town fell asleep and then woke up again not knowing what had happened to them. Don't want to say more than that. I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel, a very twisted book about social media and obsession. Watching Women and Girls by Danielle Pender, a short story collection about women being observed and under scrutiny all the time, but also doing that back to each other. The Centre by Yisha Manazir Siddiqui. This one I think should have been higher on the list because again I think about it a lot. It's about translation, about colonialism, and it's, well, I guess the plot is about a woman who discovers a centre that you can go to if you pay £10,000. They'll make you fluent in a language over a really short space of time, like just a couple of days, but there is a huge price to pay, a big catch. Children of Paradise by Camilla Gradova was my favourite book from last year's Women's Prize, set at a dilapidated cinema in Edinburgh. This collection of rogue employees who like to take drugs and watch films after hours. Very grimy, enjoyed it a lot. All Yours by Claudia Pinheiro, translated from the Spanish by Miranda France. It's about a woman called Inez who witnesses her husband killing his mistress, and she decides to help him clean up after this crime without telling him, and then gets herself into a little bit of a pickle. Ordinary Wonder Tales by Emily Urquhart is an essay collection looking at pandemics, disability, ableism in medical fields and folklore. Idle Burning by Rinasami, which I think is translated from the Japanese by Asa Yanida, is about a teenage girl who's obsessed with a J-pop star who hits a female fan. I mean, she was obsessed with him before he did that, and then when he does that, she has to decide whether or not that affects the way she feels about him. Miss I Sandwich by Miko Kawakami, which is translated from the Japanese by David Boyd, I think. No, it's translated by Louise Heel Kwai. It is about a young boy who is struggling both at home and at school. He's struggling to make friends at school, and at home his grandmother is dying, his mum started a new job, he's feeling quite displaced really, and the thing that grounds him is going to the local mall after school and watching this woman who he calls Miss Ice Sandwich make sandwiches over and over and over again. The Employees by Olga Raun, translated from the Danish by Martin Aitken, is a strange science fiction book about a spaceship called the 6000 ship, where half of its employees are humanoid, half are human, and they have discovered this weird potential life form on another planet, these egg-shaped objects, and all of the inhabitants of this spaceship are using these eggs as a means to discuss what it means to be human and alive. It's a series of interviews, and the further into the book you get, the harder it is to discern whether it's a human or a humanoid talking. Is Mother Dead by Vigdis Hjorth, which is translated from the Norwegian by Charlotte Bolsund, is, I would say, a Norwegian book for fans of Ali Smith. The way that she writes is quite similar. It's about an estranged daughter who travels back to Norway, having been away for decades, to try and potentially reconnect with her family, but she's very nervous to do that, so she ends up just stalking her family instead. All the Little Bird Hearts by Victoria Lloyd Barlow is about a woman called Sunday Forrester. It's an Own Voices autistic book, and Sunday uses a book from the 1950s on etiquette to form the way that she communicates with other people, and she becomes very attached to a new neighbour who seems to the reader to want something from Sunday, but Sunday can't really see that. And I loved how as a reader, we had access to things that Sunday didn't, which meant that this tension was building in the book that Sunday herself wasn't even particularly aware of. It was really effective. Open Up by Thomas Morris, another short story collection by him. Again, looking at toxic masculinity, and again, I really, really enjoyed it, but not going to make my favourites list. We're getting really near the top now. It's going to get hard. Chrysalis by Anna Metcalf is about a woman who decides to completely transform her appearance. So she almost becomes a bodybuilder at the gym, and we see her through the eyes of three other people. Firstly, from someone else at the gym, then from her mother, and also from a colleague. So her metamorphosis is chronicled by other people, but we never hear her voice. Like quite a few of the books I read last year, it is also exploring social media. And we've got Diary of a Void by Emmy Yagi, The Subtweet by Vivek Shraya, Playing Games by Huma Qureshi, and Prophet Song by Paul Lynch. And I have to decide how many, if any, I would like to put on my ultimate favourites list. You know, and this may be controversial, I think I might not include any of them. I love them so much, but I don't think that enough time has passed to really see if any are going to have that lasting impact. And right now, I don't feel like particularly any of them do, which sounds like I'm bashing them. I'm absolutely not. I love these books. And I had a brilliant reading year last year, but it was a lot of really great books as opposed to these are my favourite books of all time kind of reading year. So Diary of a Void is set in Tokyo, and it's about a woman who's very frustrated being set all of these menial tasks in her office because she's the only woman who works there. So she decides she's going to pretend to be pregnant in order to gain respect, and it takes her in an interesting direction. The Subtweet by Vivek Shraya is about two musicians, one who takes herself really very seriously, doesn't particularly want to be discovered, wants to be under the radar. Like, if she's popular, that means that her art can't possibly be that good. But then another artist called Rukmini covers one of her songs, and that song then becomes super popular. And this musician has to decide whether or not she'd like to try and befriend her, ride on the back of that success, potentially sell out. I would recommend it for fans of Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kuang. Playing Games by Huma Qureshi is a wonderful novel about sisterhood. And then Prophet Song by Paul Lynch was obviously the winner of the Booker Prize last year, a dystopian novel set in Ireland. So tense, so gripping. But yeah, I don't think it's going to make my ultimate favourite books of the last 10 years list. So that's the end of going through all of those videos. I'm gonna go grab some lunch because I've been talking for a long time, and I'm gonna mull all of this over, and then I'm gonna come back and we're gonna decide what books are gonna make my best books of the last 10 years list. I'll be back in literally 1 second. Okay, it is time. I am fed, I am fueled, I am ready to tackle. So, these were the books that I wrote down saying that these would be, I guess, my top favourite books of the last 5 years. So we had Doreen by Barbara Noble. This is a novel from, I'm not sure when it was first published, but it is about the Second World War, and it's about a young girl called Doreen who is evacuated to the countryside. And Barbara Noble herself lived through the Second World War. She also wrote another book called The House Opposite about the Blitz, which she lived through, and it's published by Persephone. So that is definitely one of my favourite books of the last 5 years. Then we had Sitting Pretty by Rebecca Tausig, which is a non-fiction book about disability, accessibility, ableism, and teaching disability studies. The Frida Klein series by Nikki French. This is about a psychoanalyst called Frida Klein who gets tied up in a series of mysteries. She helps the police to solve certain things. You find out so much about her life. You find out about her huge group of friends. And I just love how all of the cast came together and how you came to really truly care about them, because there are 8 books in the series. I listened to them on audiobook. They are narrated by Beth Chalmers, and she does such a brilliant job. The first one is called Blue Monday. You've heard me talk about it till I'm blue in the face, so I'm sure I don't need to talk to you about it anymore. Then I said The Bass Rock by Evie Wilde. This is set over 3 different time periods. We have one that's set in medieval times about a woman who's been accused of witchcraft. one that's set in the 1950s, which is about a woman called Ruth, which reminded me quite a lot of Sarah Waters' writing. She is a stepmother and is struggling to integrate into this family now that she's married her new husband. And then we have a modern day section, which is about a woman who is also tied to a place called the Bass Rock and this house that Ruth lived in, and she's going through Ruth's things. And the modern day section really reminded me stylistically of Ali Smith. So basically it was just ticking so many boxes for me. It's an exploration of how women are vilified and have been vilified throughout the centuries, and what has changed but also what has not changed. Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo is a novel in 5 acts. It feels a little bit like a play because it often feels like the characters are monologuing at you, but I feel like when we say if someone is monologuing at you, that sounds like that's a bad thing. I don't mean that in a bad thing at all. It feels like the characters are speaking directly to you. In each of the 5 sections, we are introduced to different characters. So in the first 4, each section has 3 new characters, 1 girl, 1 woman, and 1 other. So someone who is related to these 2 women in some kind of way. And then the last section reintroduces some of those characters again. Most of these characters are women. Most of them are black women who live in the UK. And it's such a tapestry. I was so impressed by the scope of it and everything that it covered, and how I came to truly care about these women. And also how, even though they may not side with each other because a lot of them are feuding, you end up siding a lot of the time with whoever's perspective you're reading from. And I thought that that was so clever and persuasive and just a masterclass in writing. Loved it so much. Then we have Passing by Nella Larsen. This is a book from the 1920s. It's about 2 lighter skinned black women who live in Harlem. One of them has decided that she's going to try and pass as white, and she ends up marrying quite a racist white man. And then the other woman marries a black man, lives as a black woman in a black community. They haven't seen each other since childhood, and then they meet, I think in their 20s. They're called Irene and Claire. And this meeting is dangerous for both of them, like hanging out together, because of how different their lives are. It's a very short book that has an explosive ending. Mrs. March by Virginia Fito is a novel about a woman whose husband is a writer, and she thinks that everyone is whispering about her, saying that the main character in his latest book is based on her, and it's a really unflattering depiction of who she is. So she feels really betrayed by this, wants to investigate why he's doing this. She's also extremely paranoid. It reminded me in many ways of Death in Her Hands by Tessa Moshfegh too. Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au is a novel about a young woman who decides to meet up with her mum in Tokyo. This is neutral ground for both of them. Neither of them live there, and they go on a holiday together. And it's about them trying to navigate their relationship as grown-ups, because the mother still wants to mother the daughter. But now that the mother is older, the daughter wants to mother her. And they get on each other's nerves. They find each other quite frustrating, but at the same time, they really love each other. They're trying not to end each conversation in an argument. I thought it was really wonderful. Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer is a book that I will forever associate with Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. I think that that definitely heightened my enjoyment of it, which I think is interesting. Not to take anything away from Maps itself, because it's a novel in its own right, but I can't help but link it with Grief is a Thing with Feathers, because it's about a family where the mother slash wife has cancer, and it's leading up to her death, and cancer has a voice in the book, like Crow in Grief is a Thing with Feathers, Ted Hughes' character Crow. It feels almost like a prequel to Grief is a Thing with Feathers, and I'm sure it's very heavily influenced by it. Again, I just thought it was innovative, doing lots of really interesting things, and also was extremely emotional. And then the final book that I had on this list was Eleanor Knows by Claudia Pinheiro, which is translated from the Spanish by Frances Riddle. It's about a woman called Eleanor whose daughter Rita has recently died. Everyone thinks she died by suicide, but Eleanor is convinced that she didn't. It's set over the course of one day as she tries to work out what happened to her daughter. But it's also more than that. It's tied into discussions to do with women's rights. Eleanor is also a very unlikable character. She has a lot of internalized ableism. She has Parkinson's herself, and the representation of Parkinson's in the book is so brilliant, and it's told through Crip Time. You live every single moment with her. She's a complicated person, but you're still on her side. So those are definitely my favourite books of the last 5 years. Then in 2019, these were my favourite books of 2014 to 2018. I had Peter and Alice by John Logan, which is one of my favourite plays ever. Another Day in the Death of America by Gary Young, which is a non-fiction book looking at gun crime in the States. Why God is a Woman by Nin Andrews, which is a prose poetry collection, a satirical look at gender and its magical realist. The Tidal Zone by Sarah Moss is about a young girl who collapses at school, but this is told through the eyes of her father. And the doctors don't really know why she collapsed, and they say to her family it may happen again. So the family is living in this liminal space where they're anticipating something bad happening all the time. And that's juxtaposed by the father writing about the reconstruction of Coventry Cathedral after the Second World War. So it's about a rebuilding. Don't Call Us Dead by Danez Smith is another poetry collection. It's about race, it's about police brutality, it's about being HIV positive and queer. And this was our overall winner of the Forward Prize the year that I read it. And I'll always remember Danez reading from their work the night of that ceremony and how powerful it was. The Dumb House by John Burnside. I have a feeling this isn't going to make my overall top books of the last 10 years list. It was definitely a book for that time, definitely a book of those 5 years. But I'm not sure if I reread it now, I would love it quite as much. It's a very violent book. It's about a man who decides he wants to learn how language acquisition works. And he also believes that if he kills something and watches it carefully, he'll be able to see a soul leave that thing or person's body. So you can imagine that both of these things mean he does quite horrific things. So yes, loved it back then, but I don't feel the urge to reread it now. Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter is a book inspired by Ted Hughes's character Crow, about a man whose wife dies and he's trying to look after his 2 sons while being completely consumed by grief, which takes the form of Crow, this giant crow that enters their house and torments them with promises that their mother/wife is going to come back if they wish for it hard enough. One of the most devastating things I think anybody would ever read. Autumn by Ali Smith and Winter by Ali Smith were on my list, which were the first 2 seasonal quartet books. I don't remember why I put both of them on, because I think I'd said I only wanted to include 1 book per author in this list. But Winter is my favourite out of the 2. It has quite a few Dickens references, some Shakespeare references. It's about a man called Art who's travelling to his mother's house to spend Christmas with her, but his girlfriend Charlotte recently dumped him, so he hires a woman called Lux to pretend to be his girlfriend. It's about performative nature and performative art, which he is accused of doing. There's lots of wordplay in there. English Animals by Laura Kay is about a Slovakian woman called Mieka who travels to the UK to become a nanny, and she's hired by Sophie and Richard, who are 2 people who own this manor house. But when she gets there, it turns out they don't actually have a child, so she's been led there under false pretenses. She learns all about taxidermy, looks after their house. It's a discussion on class and immigration, and it's also a queer love story as well. A Place for Us by Fatemeh Farhin Mirza is a epic novel about 5 members of one Indian American Muslim family. The son in the family is estranged from the rest of the family members, and you discover why over the course of the whole book, which spans I think about 20 years. It's absolutely brilliant. And then the last book on my list was The Book of Strange New Things by Michelle Faber, which is about a man called Peter who's sent across the universe to preach the word of God to an alien life form. He leaves his wife behind as the world is disintegrating, and I am currently rereading this for Patreon Book Club. Over on Patreon this year, we are rereading some of my favourite books ever to see if I still love them, and also if you still love them. So if you would like to join in with that, I will link my Patreon in the description box down below. So we have 2 lists here. We have 2 best books of the last 5 years lists. And now I want to bring them together and make an ultimate best books of the last 10 years list, which means I'm going to erase some of these books and condense it. Let me do that and come back to you. Okay, I would love to say I'd whittled it down to 10 so that we had a top 10 books from the last 10 years, because that sounds rounded and nice and pleasing. But I have 11 and I can't make the list any shorter, and I'm not going to do it because that would be for an arbitrary reason and that's silly. So here is my ultimate list, my top books of the last 10 years. I'm not going to go through the blurbs again because I just told you what they're about. I will insert the covers on the screen. We have Why God is a Woman by Nin Andrews, Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter, English Animals by Laura Kay, A Place for Us by Fatemeh Farhian Mirza, The Book of Strange New Things by Michelle Faber, the Frida Klein series by Nikki French, The Bass Rock by Evie Wilde, Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Evaristo, Passing by Nella Larson, Eleanor Knows by Claudia Pinheiro, and Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer. That is a very strong list. I mean, as it should be, really. I don't know how many books I have read in the last 10 years, but well over 1,000. So to say that these are the best 11 books out of over 1,000 books is quite a stamp of approval. I would love to know how many of these top books you have read, but also, just as I was going through everything in this video, how many times you thought, oh, I remember you talking about that, or I read that 6 years ago because of this particular video. Let's have a chat in the comment section down below. And if you want to tell me your favorite books from the last 10 years, I would obviously love to hear about those too, please. That would be great. If you've made it to the end, then kudos to you, because I feel this is probably going to be a really long video. If you enjoyed this video and you're new to my channel and you would like to subscribe, that would be lovely. If you enjoy the content that I put out and you would like to consider supporting me on Patreon, that'd be very kind. Patreon is a place where you can tip creators whose work you enjoy, and the support over there allows me to keep creating free content on here for everybody, and also funds my time making it accessible by creating captions and all of that good stuff. I am sending lots of love to you all, and I will see you for another video very soon. Bye.